On this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out, we find out from the panel their thoughts on the Buffalo demolition of the Montreal Canadiens, and also for Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki. Could they be top 15 NHL goal scorers by the end of the year? And what to do with the young defensemen right now for the Montreal Canadiens? Do you keep them here, send them down to Laval? And finally, The Book by Pierre Gervais. We'll get their thoughts on that book that came out and what the reaction will be moving forward for the team, and also the bonus questions as well on this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out. And welcome into another edition here of Hockey Inside Out. Stu Cowan back with us, along with Andrew Berkshire and Rick Green. Gentlemen, let's dive into it. Buffalo demolished the Montreal Canadiens at the Bell Center 7-2. Thoughts on this game and reaction? What was good, what was bad from this Buffalo-Montreal game?
Well, every team's going to have games like that during the season. The Canadiens are due, I guess, to have a bad one. It's the first time they've looked like they did at this point last season. The biggest concern is that's back-to-back games, so they were down 2-0 real early in the game, and then 3-0 against Buffalo. They were able to come back against Philadelphia. But, Marty St. Louis likes to say he doesn't coach mistakes. He coaches trends. I guess after back-to-back games like that, there's sort of trends. They've now given up 7 first-period goals in the last 3 games. They'd given up 7 total in all the games before that. So the slow start is a concern. Mike Matheson, another rough start. I mean, he was -2 3 minutes into his first game back, and he was -1 after the first shift last night. So games like that are going to happen. Jake Allen had a rough night too. But the biggest concern, more than the 7-2 loss, is the fact that back-to-back games where they seem to sleep at home to start the game, and there's no excuse for that.
And it's really tough when you get behind 3 goals in the first couple of minutes, and it's obviously not the kind of starts that they've had previously, because they've taken a lot of pride in getting out of the gate quickly. But that's a tough hole to dig yourself out of when you get down so early. And they've rallied before against Philly, but they can't continue on that same type of play. But the bottom line out of all this, 22 goals against in the last 4 games. So that area is of real concern. And again, Stu touched on, Jake Allen. He had a tough time. If you, look at the success they've had previously, it was a big part of it was their goaltending. So that has to get a lot better. They have to shore up their defensive game in order for them to get this thing straightened out. And what we're seeing is just typical kind of stuff, growing pains of some young guys that are trying to understand how to play the game each and every night. It's a grind. It's a long season. You're going to have nights like that, but I'm sure Martin St. Louis is addressing. Okay, let's get to the fact that we got to get out of the gate quicker and play not from behind early on.
Yeah, I think we talked about this as something that was probably going to happen eventually, right? A stretch like this where the goaltending wasn't as great, and the veterans come back and you expect them to be a stabilizing presence, but they haven't played as much, so they're kind of rusty. There was a couple moments with Mike Matheson in the last game where he just seemed to forget what he was supposed to be doing, and Joel Edmondson, I think, is really struggling from a focus and decision-making perspective with and without the puck right now, outside of the PK where he still is quite strong. At even strength, he's just been a bit of a liability. And Jake Allen now, 4 straight games below a 90% save percentage. I think one of the things that Marty St. Louis is going to have to look at going forward is operating his goaltending more in a platoon-like structure where Montembeault is playing almost half the games, because we've seen this with Jake Allen now for several seasons where he has a great stretch of play and they ride him too hard and he starts to get tired and his mental focus kind of withers a little bit. And, the goals that went in from the Sabres were all pretty good goals, but there were moments where, Allen was not fighting to see the puck through traffic, where he just wasn't his usual self. And when you're not 100% there, those chances go in. So did the Canadiens play terribly? Yes. I don't think there was any player on the Montreal Canadiens who you could point to in that game who had a great game, but Jake Allen didn't help them out either.
No, I think you're right. Andrew, you're right. I mean, we've seen it in previous seasons. Jake Allen, when he gets played too much, he seems to lose his game a little bit, and he also gets hurt. remember the groin injuries last year. So I think moving forward, it might be a good idea for Marty St. Louis to maybe, as you say, go in a tandem with the two goalies. Montembeault's played well this season when he has been in the net for the most part. So moving forward, it'll be interesting to see how they do that with the goaltending situation. You mentioned Edmondson and Matheson. I mean, Edmondson missed all of training camp, all of preseason. It's tough to come back in there. I'm sure you know, Rick, and also with Matheson missing so much time. So they're struggling a little bit, but give him a little time. And the thing I like too after the game is Marty St. Louis, there was no panic. He's just, it's one of those nights. He was asked about, after the morning skate, he had said, the first 10 minutes could be the most important part of the game. And then he said, well, I guess I should have been less than that. It was the first 3 minutes were most important. But he's no panic with Marty St. Louis. It was one of those nights, and he says you move on and thankful that they're playing again the next night in Columbus.
Well, let's face it too. You got to give full marks to Buffalo, even though the Canadiens weren't their sharpest. Buffalo that came at them, playing pretty desperate after being, after losing so many games. And Skinner, for an example, this guy seems to have the Canadiens number. Every time he comes to town, he's lighting it up, and they just got they did a great job. I mean, they got some kids that can really crank it up, and they cranked it up to the point where they kind of embarrassed the Habs last night.
Well, good thing for the Habs is the game wasn't in Columbus, so we didn't have to hear that cannon go off.
Yeah, it was a big effort from a lot of Sabres. You could tell from the hop that they were very desperate to get that win. And anytime that it seemed that the Canadiens got momentum, they were there and they kind of pushed the game back the right way. It was a great win for that team.
Yeah, they had lost 8 in a row coming into that game too.
That's right. And if you look at it from this perspective, right, Jeff Skinner is the new John LeClair against the Montreal Canadiens for the way he's tormented his team the last couple of years. Positive though, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield. Cole Caulfield, we see what he's done so far of late along with Suzuki. Gentlemen, in your mind, could they end up being top 15 goal scorers by the end of the NHL year? The projection right now for Suzuki is 99 points, and for Cole Caulfield, 86 points if they play the full year without a hiccup.
The thing with Cole is he's shooting from everywhere. And, the goal he scored against Buffalo was from far out. He just let it go, and then it went in. And the way he shoots the puck, it's remarkable the way he shoots the puck. I remember the first time seeing him at the first development camp, the first time he came down the wing and fired the puck, and we went, wow, this kid can shoot. The Canadiens haven't had anybody in the top 10 in points since Mats Naslund in 1986, so the odds are against it happening. I think Cole Caulfield can end up in the top 10 in goals the way he's scoring, but the concern is, one, the power play has been horrible. It was 0 for 6 against Buffalo, and the secondary scoring. As the season moves on, if they don't get secondary scoring, it's going to be tougher for Suzuki and Caulfield to keep producing the way they are. Teams will focus more on them. The odds say no, just from Canadiens' history and the way things have gone. But the future is certainly bright for these two. It's amazing the way they're able to find each other over the ice. The tying goal against Philadelphia is 4 seconds left on the clock. 99% of players in the NHL are shooting that puck, not looking to make a cross-ice pass through like 6 legs and 5 sticks to put it on Caulfield's stick for the goal. So the future is bright. Are they top 10 just yet or top 15? Probably not, just with the way this team is going, but a couple of years from now, I could see that happening.
I would like to think that they would continue, racking up the points. I mean, if I look at their play, not necessarily all just the two of them, but all three of them together complement each other and making things happen. And every game they're having opportunities to light it up, and they get it. They will get into a little bit of a downtime, but the main point here is they got so much skill and so much confidence right now, and they will continue on their scoring ways. I think as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think Suzuki's goal scoring is going to fall off a little bit because I don't believe he's going to shoot 26% the rest of the season. But the chemistry between him and Caulfield and Dach are it's very real. And Dach is the kind of facilitator that continues to give them offensive zone possessions. And, he's got some playmaking capabilities. He goes to the net relatively frequently. He does everything to make those two fully align, right? And that's exactly what you want on that line. And Caulfield, I don't expect his goal scoring to fall off at all because he's shooting 15.6%. He's getting shots on net every single game. He had 4 in the first period last night. Obviously, Canadiens didn't muster as much after that first period, which was very familiar to the New Jersey game. But overall, Caulfield's getting like 4 or 5 shots every single night. That's what a goal scorer who scores at a 40, 50 goal pace does. I expect him to continue around that pace, but being a top 10 to 15 point getter in the league, it's very difficult. And as everyone mentioned here, the secondary scoring eventually needs to do something, or else these guys are going to start to slow down. And even when they do, like the secondary scoring does click in, there will be stretches where Caulfield and Suzuki go a little bit cold. I think Caulfield had a cold stretch here before the last couple of games. So sustainable, probably not, but fun, yes.
Yeah, well, Caulfield's on pace for 52 goals this season. It's a short sample size, but if you go back to last season, he's got 33 goals in 55 games with Marty St. Louis. That's a longer sample size, and that's a 50-goal pace right there. So he's shown since Marty St. Louis came over and gave him the freedom. His hands aren't as tight as they were in Dominic Ducharme's system.
And let's not forget, the opposition knows when these guys are on the ice and they're going to bring something dangerous offensively, and they're, as much as they can, try and be on top of them to discourage any real good chances against. And they're still finding ways, whether it's shots to the net, but they're still getting the production offensively. So you got to give them full credit. They're finding ways to get it done.
Yeah, it's a great point, Rick. It's no secret where the offense is coming from. Every team knows, and every team is trying to stop it. And so far, they haven't been able to.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby Dach has been playing like a beast. I mean, Chicago, if you're looking at him now and going, wow, how come we didn't get that out of him when he was in Chicago? But he's just been both ends of the ice. I mean, back checking, forward checking, winning puck battles. He had a couple of wraparounds he tried against Buffalo that just missed. He's a beast out there. I mean, and what a great fit he's been since Marty St. Louis put him with Caulfield and Suzuki. People thought maybe Josh Anderson might be that guy. When they drafted Slavkovsky, there was talk that Slavkovsky might be the winger for those guys. And moving forward, he might be if eventually they move Dach back to center. But for now, boy, Kirby Dach, what a great trade that was by Kent Hughes. He's really brought something and added something to those two other guys.
Well, the Habs have 2 poachers in Caulfield and Suzuki. There could be a third one in Kirby Dach in the coming years. We'll find out as we do see some bright spots with this Habs team moving forward. However, the back line for the Montreal Canadiens, the young 3 defensemen here, gents, what do you do with this? Do you keep them here? Do you send a couple guys down to Laval for more seasoning? Rick Green, you are a man of great experience in this position. What should be the decision now for the Habs moving forward?
Well, unfortunately, we had this talk before about when the blue line gets healthy and these guys come back, there's going to be a numbers crunch as far as who gets in and who gets out. And, the young guys obviously got to pay the price, even though they've shown them that they're able to play fairly well at the NHL level, which is a huge bonus for such inexperienced guys back there. But listen, I don't think it's a terrible thing to put guys in, put guys out, long as it's not a long-term type of thing. The guys that do end up sitting a game here or there, providing that they're watching and learning, it's still to their advantage. And if it gets to the point where they're out for an extended period and they're not going to play, then I think they'd have to entertain the thought of getting them down to play in Laval, and that's a hard decision to come by when they're able to contribute at the NHL level. But one thing remains the same is they're good. The potential is there. They're progressing, with typical bumps in the road, having a good game, not having a good game. But I think they're type of character guys that are quite aware of when they get the opportunity, they're going to make sure that their name's not going to come out of the hat as the one that's going to sit next game.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between a healthy scratch and a healthy scratch, right? In that not all situations are the same. And it seems like the communication is there from the Canadiens coaching staff with these young players of what they want to look for, what they should be trying to get from watching the games with the sky view and trying to improve their game while they're not necessarily playing. A few scratches here and there I don't think are going to hurt anybody. I feel like when I was younger and watching the games, I was much more upset when a young player would get scratched because you're like, oh, how are you putting this guy who's playing way better than the veterans out of the lineup? It makes no sense. But as you get older and you talk to people around the game, sometimes the young players need to learn something. And they can learn it better by seeing from above and not being at game level, see where they're making mistakes and improve. But overall, I do think that if this lasts too long and there's not any more injuries or any trades for the Canadiens, they can't carry 8 defensemen forever. And if they continue to rotate guys in and out, I do think the veterans should be part of that rotation. I know it might not be the best for trade deadline value per se, but having some load management capabilities for guys like Edmondson and Savard, who's played so many minutes in this young season already, just letting their bodies take a rest once in a while is not the worst thing. It's a development season for these young guys for sure, but we also don't want David Savard's muscles to all explode at once from blocking a billion shots and skating harder than he's ever skated. So it makes sense to rotate almost everybody except for maybe Caden Gooley.
Yeah, I was talking with Jordan Harris after the morning skate Tuesday, and he said that Marty St. Louis and Stefan Robida pulled the 3 young guys, himself, Kovacevic, and Jacky into a room and explained to them what was going on and how they would rotate through. And the communication has been really, really good. I asked St. Louis after the game, after the Sabres game, if he thought it was sustainable for an extended period with 8 defensemen. And he said, I don't know. We'll see. And one of the things, a lot of questions Marty St. Louis answers with, I don't know. And it's a little refreshing because he's honest. Like he doesn't know. They're going to see how this plays out. And you got to remember, it's easy to forget. He's an inexperienced NHL head coach. He's trying different things. Going to see how they work. They're going to see how it made sense for them to keep 8 defensemen because it avoided having to put one of the young guys down or put someone on waivers also. But moving forward, I don't think it is sustainable. I just think it's too many bodies. Kovacevic and Jacky sitting out against Buffalo. They could have used Jacky when it got physical there. You know, Jake Evans took an elbow to the head, a real cheap shot. Maybe that doesn't happen if Jacky was on the ice. I don't think it's sustainable moving forward, but there was 20 scouts at the Bell Center for the Sabres game, and there's teams looking for a defenseman. When the Canadiens signed Chris Weidman, he was sort of a security blanket. He knew what his role was going to be here. He wouldn't mind being the 7th defenseman. You wonder if maybe there's an interest from another team in Weidman because they don't really need that security blanket right now with how well Jack guys played and how well the young guys have played. But one of Marc Bergevin's lines was a good one. He says you can never have too many defensemen. Injuries are going to happen. So moving forward, it's going to be interesting, but I don't think you can keep going with 8 defensemen. I think at some point you got to maybe rotate sending some of the young guys down to play in the NHL where they can play some monster minutes down there. I'd be surprised to see St. Louis make a healthy scratch of one of the veterans moving forward, just because I don't know how that go over. But the young guys got to play, and moving forward, it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I don't think it's sustainable to keep 8 defensemen for an extended period here.
Well, Jets, when you look at it right now, if you had to send 2 defensemen down to Laval, who would they be from the young core right now on the roster?
The first one gets sent down, I think it would be Jacky. He has the most to work on, right? His defensive awareness really struggles at times, and I think he struggles with trying to prove himself too much, trying to fight too often, and I do think that Marty St. Louis kind of set him up a little bit too much in the last game. There was almost no way that he wasn't going to fight. They talked about the grit and everything that he brings to the table, and maybe that put him a little bit in a situation where he felt like he needed to. But I think Arber Xhekaj has the most to work on, and that makes sense to me that he'd go down and play big minutes in Laval. And I think putting him on the power play for those stretches also showed that like they expect that he can actually take things to the next level. So going down and playing on the power play with guys like Matthias Norlinder and learning from them could actually help his game quite a bit.
The only concern I would have about Jacky going down is going to be a target on him for every tough guy in the NHL is going to want to drop the gloves with him to try and prove themselves. So that would be a concern for me sending Jacky down.
Yeah, for me also, Kovacevic would be the one. I would like to see Jacky be part of the the roster just because he does command a lot of respect with the team as far as if anything or anybody steps out of line, he's there to to make sure that the message is sent. So, I mean, I don't mind some of the errors that he's making. He can correct them, Jacky, and I think that he's shown before that he's able to handle himself quite well, and he's a bonus to have in the lineup, I think.
Yeah, with 7 defensemen, it would be a lot easier. You could just sort of take turns with one of the young guys sitting out, and it wouldn't be, they wouldn't sit out for an extended period. I mean, they had to get Weidman in the line. He had sat out, I think, 6 games in a row. You can't have a guy sitting out that long. At some point, you got to put him in the lineup, which is why Montezuma, I think, put him in against Buffalo. But again, moving forward, I mean, if they could get something for Weidman at this point, I think they'd probably be willing to move him, which would help the situation. But again, everything could change quickly with injuries, right? I mean, we're talking about the amount of shots David Savard blocks and Edmondson and these guys. Edmondson's back. Is it going to hold out through the whole season? So there's a lot of questions there. But again, I think at some point they're going to have to send one of the young guys down to Laval and let them play a ton of minutes, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, we should note that Kovacevic can't be the guy because he'd have to pass through waivers.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this, though. Caden Gooley laid out the boom against Buffalo in Montreal, and that was a pretty big hit. So if you look at the prospects of what the future is for this defenseman core that we have with the young guys coming up here, it's bright, and we'll find out what they do moving forward if they do send guys to Laval. Maybe trade one of the veterans away before the holiday season arrives next month.
Well, Goulet looks like he's been in the NHL for 10 years. I mean, the kid's unbelievable how solid he's been. And I was starting to see a little bit of a mean streak come out in him also, which is a good thing. I mean, for defense in the NHL. But, man, this kid is just impresses me game after game after game. He's just so solid and smooth out there. And, he's made David Savard look good. But I think David Savard has helped make Caden Goulet look good also. David Savard's played some really good hockey since the start of the season.
Well, we're going to find out what they do in the coming weeks here, if they do make a trade or send someone down to Laval. Well, on to the book by former Habs equipment manager Pierre Gervais. He talks about the mood swings of Marc Bergevin, the Dom Ducharme locker room confidence, and talks about Max Pacioretty and PK Subban as well. Gentlemen, your thoughts on this and what will be the long-term ramifications as this book is unveiled sooner than later?
I think this is more confirmation of things that we all kind of knew, right? Like there's always been persistent rumors of Marc Bergevin being relatively immature and over emotional at times. And, he loves a player until they do something that he doesn't like. And then all of a sudden he just switches all the way to the other side. Now he hates the player and now they got to get rid of him. We saw this with Pacioretty. We saw this with a few different players over the course of his tenure with the Montreal Canadiens. The whole Pacioretty thing was the most surprising to me, just because he went pretty far in his criticism of him. But it tracks, right, with what we know of the player. Everything seems to fit relatively well. But one thing we have to remember is this book is Pierre Gervais' perceptions of what happened throughout Canadiens history while he was the equipment manager there. It's not necessarily, exactly what went on. And, he went to mention in an interview recently that he didn't, include big like quotations or anything from people in this book. It's his recollections of how situations unfolded over his tenure. And I think it's a shame, honestly, that it's not going to be published in English to start, because I think they're missing out on a huge portion of the fan base and hockey as a whole, because let's face it, Gervais is a very big name in the behind the scenes section of hockey. There's a reason why he was working for Team Canada. Like, this guy is a legend in his own right. And I think that everyone should have access to reading this stuff that isn't, translated on the fly by people on the internet. So I am excited to see the book when it actually comes out and read more than just the salacious parts that get thrown out there right now.
Well, for me, I've known Jervy for quite a few years, and to hear some of the comments coming from his book, I think obviously he's trying to sell the book. He's trying to throw some things out there that people maybe didn't realize. But like Andrew said, I think there was things that we kind of knew about. You look at Dominic Ducharme, the indication of the team play under him. It doesn't come as any surprise that there was something wrong with the relationship that he had with the players and the coach, just by the way they're underperforming. But, the interesting part about all of this is people like to hear and read about, stuff behind the scenes. I'm a little surprised that Jervy came forward with some of those comments, other than maybe he's looking at more sales by, coming out with this stuff. But I would like to have a look at it and read it, because I know from previous experience he'd have one great wine list that he would highly recommend that people would try, in his from his experience. But anyways, it's an interesting time for this to be published. But the main point being is the trainers usually have a really good feel for what goes on in the dressing room. They're there. They got their finger on the pulse in a lot of ways. Some of the stuff is probably real legit, and then other stuff is just his perspective.
Well, Montreal's the only city in the NHL, maybe Toronto also, where people would actually be talking about a book by an equipment manager, sort of behind the scenes guy. What surprised me most is that he actually wrote a book. After the last game last season, when he announced he was going to retire, I wrote a column saying, this guy would have a million great stories to tell from his 35 years, but don't hold your breath waiting for it, because the biggest rule for guys in those positions is what happens in the room stays in the room. And it was Michel Bergeron who first hired Gervais as a stick boy, I think, with Trois-Rivières and Junior, and that was what he drilled into him. What happens in the room stays in the room. And if it doesn't, those guys lose their jobs. I mean, there's been guys in positions within the Canadiens room, Rick, you'd know this, who lost their jobs in the past because they started talking about stuff that was going on in the room. The other thing is when you start airing other people's dirty laundry, you got to be careful that people don't come back and start airing yours. I don't know what there is with Pierre Gervais over the time, but I'm sure there might be some stories out there that might not be too flattering about him also. Who knows? But as you said, nothing in the book was really shocking. I mean, Dominic Ducharme never had the room. That became pretty obvious. Remember the playoff run when Luke Richardson took over and Ben Sherratt said we'd all skate through a wall for Luke Richardson. They never said that about Ducharme. And, he mentions in the book that Luke Richardson did have the respect of the players and that Dominic Ducharme didn't. Marc Bergevin, too emotional, didn't know how to talk to him. It's interesting, too, that he said it would have helped Bergevin if he had an assistant GM, someone to help him with budgets, help him deal with the media, help him deal with people. Marc Bergevin, GM, the way he played. You slash me, I'm going to slash you back harder. You can't be a GM like that. You can't let emotions get the best of you. And to me, that was the downfall of Bergevin. I mean, it got ugly with Pacioretty. It got ugly with Subban. It got ugly with Radulov. It got really ugly with Markov. He made things personal, and you can't do that when you're a GM of a hockey team or when you're running any kind of business. The other chapter about how Max Pacioretty wasn't a great captain. I mean, Max Pacioretty took a lot of pride in being captain of the Canadiens. He tried to do the best job he was, but he wasn't a natural leader, and I don't think guys followed. And, there was a rift between him and PK, which Gervais also talks about in the book. He talks about PK's narcissism. So there's nothing really there from the excerpts. I haven't read the whole book. I've read the excerpts that were in some of the French papers. There's nothing really there that was shocking. To me, the biggest shock is that he actually wrote a book. I hope he makes a lot of money out of it, because I have a feeling there's a lot of guys who are in the room with him who are like, really? Like, is he going to, I'm sure a lot of foreign players are looking forward to reading the book to see if there's something about them in there that's maybe not too flattering. So it's, again, the biggest shock to me is that he decided to write the book. Brendan Gallagher said, he loves Derby. He says he did everything for me for 10 years. I'm sure Ricky was the same with you. The players loved him. He said he hopes he makes a lot of money off the book. And then Gallagher said, maybe I'll write a book one day too. And then he paused and he says, I don't have the patience for that. But I'm sure it'll be, and I imagine it will come out in English. I imagine they rushed it maybe to get it published in French before the Christmas break. But I would be surprised if they don't come out with an English version, because I'm sure there's a lot of fans, Canadiens fans who can't read French, who would love to read the book.
Yeah, and one thing they're going to have to be careful about, as it's out in French only, is people doing, fast translations that maybe aren't exactly capturing the subtlety of things that happen in French. I know we saw on Twitter just the other day, a Leafs fan was going all over Max Talbot because he compared Caulfield to Ovechkin on RDS, I believe. And turned out that what he was saying is that they play the same position and you have to cover them the same way. And the Leafs fan was assuming, based on a quotation that he'd translated on Twitter, that he was saying that Caulfield is like the next Ovechkin. And it's like, you have to get the subtlety in there. Understand that the little clip might not say what the whole chapter or the whole video clip says. So, there was a translation of the Pacioretty stuff where the English said that Pacioretty was a bad person. And it was like, whoa, that's really going far. But is that what Gerv actually meant? Or was it he was saying he was a bad captain, or he was like a little bit too focused on himself? Because that rings true. Bad person might be a little bit too far. I don't know Pacioretty personally, but we'll have to be careful with some of the quotations as they come out to make sure that we have the subtlety with them that it would have in the language that it was written in.
Yeah, I was speaking with Martin Maguire, the French play-by-play radio guy for the Canadiens, and he got an advanced copy of the book and he read the whole book, and he was saying there's more nice stories in it than negative. He says there's one good story about Saku Koivu after Gervais got divorced, and Koivu left him the keys for his old Montreal condo and told him spend all summer there, drink whatever wine you want. He left checks to pay the hydro and everything else. And he talked about how that was just the way Saku was. And he tried to pay Saku back at one point, like even just take him for a dinner, and Saku wouldn't take anything. He said that's just the way Saku was. So there's a lot of stories in there that aren't tabloid stuff. They're just sort of good stories. Probably some good stuff about Patrick Waugh. Also, Rick, I'm sure you'd be interested in reading that stuff. But when they're trying to get the book and trying to sell the book, they're also obviously going to come out and promote the stuff that's a little tabloidish, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, I was going to bring up the point here, Rick, being a former player here, and I know, Stu, you had in the article about the players saying, hey, we don't really care about the book, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But, Rick, inside that locker room, are there players that might look at Pierre Gervais differently with him doing this book, as Stu made the point, so quickly, less than a year after his retirement from the Habs?
I don't think so. I mean, anybody that knows Gervais, and I knew him very well from this standpoint. He was always kind of a quiet guy, went about his business, didn't ruffle too many feathers, and he really didn't have anything bad to say about anybody. And he was great at his job. And anybody that has had him as a trainer knew that, like Eddie Palchek, he asked him once to do something, and he would do it. And to hear some of the comments, coming out on a controversial way, if you will, a little surprised, but I think the bottom line out of all this, he's really a likable guy that I don't think too many people have anything bad to say about him. No matter what he says or comes forward in the book, it's his version, if you will. But it's not a huge thing for anybody that knows him, because he's been a great guy as long as I've known him, and I'm sure that he is even to this day, in spite of throwing this book out there with some controversial comments about individuals.
Well, we should say, like, you can't work anywhere for 35 years and have a great impression of every single person that you worked with, right? So there's going to be moments where he says things that maybe people don't want to hear about themselves, but overall, I agree with Stu. What I've heard from the entire book is that most of it is positive, fun stories, and I do think something like this is good for the game, because flat out, hockey's too secretive. So much of what happens within hockey teams, fans don't know about, and getting more of a human approach to it. We talk about media access all the time and how the Canadiens have not held up their end of the bargain for the last 10 years, and how Kent Hughes and Chantal have made things a little bit better over the last year here. This is the kind of stuff where I think it will help humanize this sport a lot. It's like, it is what we need, right? We need things to be a little bit more open for the sport to grow.
Well, Gervais, all the equipment guys, they work crazy hours. I mean, they work crazy hours. And every time I'd ever see Gervais, whether he was sharpening skates or fixing a guy's shoulder pads, he was always smiling. He always had a smile on his face. You're talking about sort of nice, heartwarming stories in the book. One of them is David Savard told Gervais he wanted his skates to be the last pair of skates he ever sharpened. So he sharpened Savard's skates, the last skates sharpened before the game. And then he says that if somebody else had to have their skates sharpened during the game, if they lost an edge, he would have made sure to sharpen Savard's again afterwards to keep his word that he told David Savard that his skates would be the last skates he ever sharpened. So that's a nice story.
That is nice.
Well, I can't wait for when Rick Green has his book coming out. It'll be 30-book epic from Rick Green on the time that he had with the Montreal Canadiens. Don't forget, gentlemen, we love this show. You can like and subscribe on our YouTube page for Hockey Inside Out, and sign up for the newsletter on MontrealGazette.com/newsletters. And for bonus content and for full episodes, go to Hockey Inside Out and submit your comments and questions. We look forward to conversing about that for a future episode. On behalf of Stu, Rick, and Andrew, wish you a great week. We'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.